so much. I'm really excited to be here today, 3 years after my initial presentation here at Walk21 in Munich. So yes, I'm going to be talking about how do you actually use data and analytics to actually achieve many of the goals that you guys are trying to implement here today. So first, this is my hometown. This is Miami, Florida, in the US. And growing up here, my most exhilarating memory is trying to cross this street, essentially playing a real-life video game, tight-roping down these pencil-thin sidewalks, basically dodging cars as I tried to traverse these strip mall-laden 6-lane highway that was masquerading as a street, all to get to a chicken teriyaki sub. So you can imagine that growing up here, especially as a carless teenager, really, really sucked. So this is my version of live, work, and play. And this was my best hope for place. So this is a Cuban-American restaurant, very well known in Miami. Lots of people would go there, particularly Cuban-American older men, and they would lament the things that happened in the U.S., that esas cosas no pasaban en Cuba, the things that didn't happen in Cuba. Now, most of their arguments were pretty exaggerated, but the one that I think that really kind of struck home to me was the things that did happen in Cuba that didn't happen in Miami, which are places like this, where you could get the coffee, where you could have an actual place and complain about the matters that be, right? So the thing is, the sad thing, is that that is not an unusual story. Many people grow up like this in the States, and this is just a smattering of different places. I won't even bother to tell you where they are, but they're all different, even though they look exactly the same. Now, okay, so enough of that, of the bad news. The good news is that in the 15 years that since I started working in this space, walkability has hit the mainstream. When I first left Miami for University of California, Irvine, to study these issues, my friends were like, what are you doing? What are you talking about walkability? Why do you have to go all the way to Irvine? And where is that anyway? To study urban design and behavior and improve walkability. But today, more and more people understand what this is, and more people are demanding it. And this includes the younger people, the 95-year-olds, people that are retiring. They're really looking for places where they can walk and not have to rely on cars. And they're choosing to live oftentimes before they're actually choosing a place to work. And even the startups and tech environment is following the same path, to the point that a lot of VC money, most of the VC money, majority of it, has actually been invested over the last several years in places that are walkable, urban, and compact. And this is not just a moment in time. It's not just 2016 that we're seeing this. This is an increasing trend over the last decade or so, where this is not going to go away. Even though there's some researchers that say otherwise, we won't go into that here. But of course, as I mentioned, most places in the U.S. are not walkable. So this is the average walk score, which is a leading, you guys know, but leading walkability indicator in the U.S. Shows that this dismal state in terms of walkability in most places. So why, if we have such a demand, why do we have such a shortage of supply? Okay, well, there's still a lot of opposition in the United States. And there's opposition from internal stakeholders, traffic engineers. Us walkability folks really love to blame traffic engineers for everything, but they actually do have a very different way of designing streets. There's obviously the people that make budgets, financing decisions. These are all, they think about things in quite a bit of a different way. So there's still a lot of opposition. There's still some bureaucratic hurdles. And there's still financing mechanisms that are archaic and prefer more single-use, more auto-oriented development. So there's really is a lack of communication about sort of how do you translate our language to the way that they make decisions. And this is a big hurdle that we've come across. We've been doing what was called customer discovery, essentially just talking to different cities and developers over the course of the last several months, really trying to hone in on what the problem was before we crafted the solution that I'll show you later. So this is just a quote from one of our clients in downtown West Palm Beach. This was essentially saying why we have to make the case for if the things are sort of working, why would we bother investing that much more? So it's really difficult to do that currently. Same with developers that are actually progressive and want to do the right thing. It's really difficult to show, kind of make a concrete data-based vision. I know that this is going to work. I know that this investment will change this place, but you just have to trust me. And lenders don't really usually work that way. So it's difficult for them to make the case. Same with smaller cities. They're seeing all these great things that are happening in other places, but for them to translate what the benefits with that, how that translates in their particular cities is really difficult. So those anecdotal case study based evidence is important to tell the story, but it still doesn't really convince the powers that be. So what are cities typically doing right now to try to solve these issues? Well, it's still very much focused on consulting, bringing experts in. It's very opinion-based for the most part. And a lot of these people really know what they're doing, but many cities can't actually afford to pay for this. And often, it's not really a scalable solution. So they come in at one time point, they make a beautiful design, and often doesn't even get implemented because it lacks the teeth, it lacks that communication piece. And on the development side, things still get done in terms of intuition and opinion and sort of local-based knowledge. So the good news is that this is starting to shift, and we're starting to see the importance of sort of the smart city movement data in transforming this or kind of enhancing this approach. I'm not trying to say that we get rid of all the consultants, because that's a lot of people in this room, so by no means am I advocating for that. And I was a consultant for 15 years, so I get it. But it's really about how do we use what's at this technology that's emanating around us to really enhance the advocacy that you guys are doing. So I want you to pick these out because I want you to take a picture of these. These are really great companies. A lot of them are based in New York, but they're really focusing on basically transforming places. And they have a lot of different ways to do that, whether it's helping you actually collect the data. Some of them provide analytics. Some of them are, again, sort of doing this data-driven story, if you will, to help you enhance the advocacy that you're doing and implement these plans. So what are we doing in this regard? Well, State of Place is a new software. It started off as a product-based sort of consulting service 5 years ago. And we quantify what it is that people love about cities, the things that make them livable, walkable. And we also forecast why it makes economic sense to make them better. So I'm going to show you how we do that and what we've done with this. So essentially, we collect data on over 290 pieces of information like street trees, sidewalks, benches, crosswalks, pretty much anything you can think of that would actually influence people's decisions to walk, what we call the microscale built environment. We capture this at the street level. We do this, again, either on-site or using Google Street View, which allows us to scale this process. We have a data collection app that's seamlessly puts the data into our servers, and we also have a rigorous training process to make sure that we have quality, reliable data. So we collect data at the block level, and often we'll aggregate it to the neighborhood level to be able to kind of give cities an assessment of what's working, what's what, from a spatial perspective as well. And what we ultimately do with this 290 pieces of information is we have an algorithm that aggregates it into a score from 0 to 100. The question that I get immediately when I say this is, well, how is this different from Walk Score? I think I just sort of answered that in terms of the type of data that we collect. So we're really getting at beyond proximity. You see there's 10 urban design dimensions that we capture here. I'll show you here. These are the 10. So you're really getting a much more sort of an understanding of what are the assets of a place and what are the needs of the place, what's making it walkable, what's not. So it's not a black box. If you have a 60, you can break down why you have a 60 and where you should begin to think about focusing your efforts in terms of improving walkability. But we don't stop there because you might have a better sense of what your needs are, but you might have a lot of needs. And that might exceed the capacity of what your budget can afford, which is pretty much everywhere at some point. So we have the forecasting model that I mentioned earlier is based on research that we published with the Brookings Institution in 2012 that tied state of place to economic value, namely real estate premiums, which are important levers for the decision makers that kind of look at this. So essentially, as you increase state of place, if you were to break that down into 5 different levels of walkability or quality of place, if you will, there's an increase of retail rents about $9 a square foot. No, sorry, that's $7 a square foot, $9 a square foot for office, a $300 premium in terms of residential rents, 80% increase in retail revenues, and about an $81 a square foot increase for residential for sale homes. So how do we put this into action? So this was the research. How do we translate it into an actual software tool? So essentially, as I said before, once you have your state of place index and the profile, which is the 10 urban design dimensions, cities can use this to begin to set urban design priorities. So the way that you would do this, you choose the specific goals that are important to you. You might really just want to focus on walkability. If you're a developer, maybe you're looking at increasing office rents or sort of creating premiums for that, so that way you can actually justify that development to the lender. So you choose the set of goals that are most important to you, and we balance that out and reprioritize the urban design dimensions that you see in the profile. We also allow you to set feasibility because each of the 10 urban design dimensions that I listed some of them are more difficult to change than others. So things like form, density, connectivity, which make up urban fabric, typically speaking, if you're talking about a neighborhood that's already existing, is really difficult to change. Whereas something like aesthetics and personal safety, like a lot of the projects that Sky mentioned, those are really, really cheap, easy things you could do. So we allow you to switch out the feasibility, and then that also reconfigures the list of priorities. So the next thing that cities can do with the software is actually start to look at evaluating what different interventions you may have in mind, or just even playing with, if I'm going to start changing any one of these 290 plus features, what is that going to do to the state of place index, to the quality of place, to the walkability? So let's see. So over here, it's really small, but you guys I can send this to you. Essentially, you have all the 290 different features, and you can toggle them on and off. It'll pull up the existing data for the block that you're making changes to, and then you can switch off to see the different things that you might want to consider for your project, or a project that's already been proposed and you're trying to understand what the actual impact would be. The platform also recommends specific changes. We do this right now. This is the only piece that's still not automated. We're doing this on the back end and provide this as an advisory service. But we're in the next maybe like 2 or 3 months, this should be as a new feature of the platform. So it's really exciting because if you go back over here, you see these little orange dots that basically will tell you, that'll be integrated where it specifically says, these are the features that you should change to sort of optimize your score. So right now we do that on the back end, and in the next couple of months, it'll be part of the platform. Okay, so here you see the results of once you've made all these changes, you can see what the impact would be of that particular proposal. This was a master plan assessment that we did for the city of Tigard, which is a suburb of Portland. And you can see that the increase, you can see here, the increase went from a 22 to a 53, but it also breaks it down in terms of how did it increase these 10 urban design dimensions, which is particularly important. again, kind of, if you think about the context that Sky presented, some of these things might be more important for you to assess and kind of increase than others, depending on if you're in an area that's close to school. Maybe you really want to focus on increasing traffic safety, for example. The other thing that the platform allows you to do, that we've done this already again for the same city of Tigard, is in this case, it was an interesting, really much more of the communication piece coming in that I mentioned before, because they had two different proposals. One that had already been approved for a medical clinic in sort of this new downtown area they were trying to redevelop, and one that was basically the exact same thing but a mixed-use concept that added residential and office. And as you can see, the increase from the original State of Place Index was quite marked, just by making kind of those mixed-use, bringing more places to actually walk to and integrating the different land uses. So what does that actually mean? I mean, if you're just showing this, that's important in terms of quantifying the quality of place, but how do you use this as ammunition for the opposition that I mentioned earlier? So the last piece is the forecasting financial economic value of all of these things that we just showed. And that picks up that forecasting model, the research that we published with the Brookings Institution, and puts this into a predictive model that says, if you've increased your State of Place Index by X number of points, what does that actually do to all of these different real estate premiums? So the user is meant to enter in the baseline information for their particular market so that it takes that context into account. And then ultimately, I redid this. This is not the way the software looks, but it was too complicated on screen so you could see it. But basically what this does is to show you, projects side by side, that analysis of that first project, which was just the medical center versus the mixed use version of it. We start to project what the actual premiums would be for these different types of uses. Of course, this one didn't have any of those uses, so you can see huge premiums here in terms of that bump of the State of Place Index. But then you can also start to look at what that actually means from a cost perspective, right? So you can look at what the actual project cost is. So there's different, and this is really important here because there's different ways to get a 20-point increase, and you might not actually have to spend $8.2 million versus 6.4. It could be a $1 million project, and you can result in the same 20-point increase. So this is a really important tool in terms of kind of communicating that and assessing the different cost-benefit analysis of your proposals. It calculates the value captured based on sort of the square footage of the project, and then ultimately an ROI, which is this is using a 10-year sort of outlook. So quickly, bottom line numbers, you can start to look at that and communicate that clearly to the people that kind of take this as sort of the first line of defense, the first way that they sort of make a decision. So as I've kind of mentioned throughout the talk, and this has been a long journey to get here. I started working on this while I was a grad student at UC Irvine. Some of you might know the Irvine, Minnesota inventory. It was an audit tool that was developed at UCI, funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation through the Active Living Research Program. And it was great. It was 162 data points at the time, but it didn't have an analytical framework by which to actually pull all the data together. And I got tons of calls because I was the grad student on the project, and which meant I kind of did the project. They were like, "Oh, Mariela, like, what do we do with this data?" So that was the first, aha moment. We're like, okay, there's something there. Started to put together sort of preliminary versions of the algorithm. Got some, consulting work out of putting that together because there seemed to be a really big need of sort of quantifying what we were doing. And of course, the Brookings study that I mentioned earlier really kind of solidified that relationship between state of place, walkability, and economic value. And we could have stopped there, but I felt that even though it had a lot, it resonated a lot, and it was cited a lot, I felt that there was a diagnostic component to the actual tool, to the state of place itself, that could be capitalized upon to actually make use this information, use the results of this research to actually help people make the changes that they needed to do. So over the course of the last 5 years, I've undergone a startup journey. It is not the same to be a consultant as it is to be a startup entrepreneur at all, which is why I mentioned the customer discovery process that we've been going through. So early this year, we got funding from the National Science Foundation through their Small Business Innovation and Research Program, which allowed us to build the software that I just showed you. And throughout that process, it was very key to do what's called Lean Startup Principles, which is essentially going out of the building and trying to understand what problems do you guys actually face and what solutions will actually help you address those problems. So this is the first version, what's called the minimum viable product of sort of the result of that process. And we worked very closely with a variety of different very early adopters before the software even existed to kind of hone in on how do we use this data in a way that makes it relatable and actually helps you create impact. So in terms of who's been using this so far, as I mentioned, the city of Tigard in Portland, you know, they have a great vision. They want to become the most walkable city in the Pacific Northwest. And you know, there's some of you in the, what's that? There's a lot of competition, you know, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, etc. And they are dismally very, very far away from that. But I think it's an important thing to think about, like creating that vision, even if it seems not at all attainable, because it puts everything in perspective. Like, okay, so if we're going to pass this plan, how does that help us achieve this vision? So it's been lovely working with them because they were great partners, and we were literally developing the platform as we were working with them. So a lot of what you see is a result of our working with them, and thankfully they are planning to use this as part of their strategic planning and even infrastructure planning, which is great. The other, our new pilot user of the actual software is a development authority in West Palm Beach. And he was one of the people that said, you know, this thing about data and really using it as ammunition. He actually said, having the data on top of the illustrations allows me to bring a gun to the gunfight. I think he was referring to the traffic engineers, and hopefully that wasn't an actual threat, but but in any case, it's been awesome working with him, and we're onboarding him to use the software this month, so we'll have sort of results from that. And then we just got a new client last week. I think that's when I went to Houston. I have no idea. I've been all over the place, and actually did the data collection there, which is crazy because I haven't done data collection in a long time. So, but in any case, this is a great example of a project that's already been approved. It's a $200 billion project. They're bringing bus rapid transit through a very high-income area of Houston and redoing the entire streetscape, which is going to be great. So it's already been approved, and yet they still are facing a lot of scrutiny. So for them, State of Place allows them to sort of quell the naysayers in the meantime, and then after the fact, we'll actually come in and collect data on the actual project and look at what the real impact was. So, okay, this is completely somewhat a sideline, but Brown has mentioned, you know, my work in China, and in my bio, you've probably seen that I split time between Shanghai, Boston, and New York, and like wondering, what does she do? And so for the last 5 or 6 years, I have another hat that I wear, believe it or not, which is a research professor at NYU. And most of my work in that regard has focused on how do you make China more walkable, focusing primarily on sort of this communication piece, understanding what are the policy barriers, what are the social cultural barriers that we need to overcome, because in light of the various sort of seemingly obvious things that the U.S. has already sort of made mistakes on, the West has made mistakes on, a lot of those are being replicated in China. So we've done work in using State of Place, looking more on the health side. So we collected State of Place for 6 different neighborhoods. I'm just going to quickly run through them. This was 3 in Shanghai, from high, medium, and low walkable and two that ultimately made it in for Hangzhou. It's too long of a story why the other one wasn't. So we got collected data from that, and then we looked at survey data that looked at how much people were walking, and we actually measured their height and their weight to calculate their body mass index. And what we found was that we divided state of place into average and above average walkability. And for those places that were above average, there was 22 minutes more of physical activity, which was quite significant. So this data actually exists in China as well. And that's it.